The envelope was heavier than expected, its golden trim catching the pale afternoon light that slipped through the blinds of Emily Carter's modest apartment in Cleveland. She hesitated before opening it, her fingertips brushing over the embossed letters that spelled out a name she once carried with pride, Daniel Miller. Her breath caught. It wasn't just a wedding invitation. It was a message, deliberate and cruel, meant to remind her of everything she had lost. For a moment the world seemed to tilt. She sat down at her worn wooden table, surrounded by textbooks and half-drunk mugs of coffee from her late-night study sessions. The letter unfolded with elegance, announcing Daniel's upcoming marriage to Sophie Anderson, a woman Emily had only seen in glossy photographs, the kind of woman who seemed born into perfection. The date, the venue, the grandeur of the script all screamed of wealth and triumph. To Emily it screamed something else, mockery. Her pulse raced as memories threatened to drown her. The man she had once believed in with every fiber of her being had moved on effortlessly, not only discarding her but now daring to parade his success in her face. And yet, despite the weight pressing down on her chest, Emily straightened her shoulders. She whispered to herself, "I'm not the same woman anymore." Before we continue this story, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, because stories like this, raw, emotional, and unforgettable, are shared here every week, and you won't want to miss the next one. Emily had been Daniel's wife once, the woman who cooked his late-night dinners, who cheered him on when his ambitions seemed like fragile dreams rather than inevitable victories. She remembered the early days when they were inseparable, both filled with hope and hungry for the future. But somewhere along the way, Daniel's hunger had turned into something else, pride, arrogance, and a thirst for recognition that left no room for love. Now, as she looked at the invitation again, she felt the sting of irony. He was marrying Sophie Anderson, a socialite known for her beauty, and her family's connections in New York's elite circles. Daniel had always wanted more, and Sophie fit neatly into his vision of status. Emily stood up and walked toward the window, gazing out at the grey skyline of her neighborhood. The streets were cracked, the sidewalks uneven, but they were hers. This life, though simple, was a testament to her resilience. She had survived the divorce, the humiliation, the whispers from neighbors who claimed she had been foolish to give up everything for him. She had endured lonely nights and the ache of starting over from nothing. And yet, the fact that Daniel had invited her wasn't kindness. No, she knew him too well. She knew him. This was Daniel's way of reminding her who he had become and who he believed she still was. Insignificant, powerless, forgotten. Her hands trembled, but she clenched them into fists. She thought of the years she had fought to rebuild herself, of the shifts at the diner, of the nights she had cried alone, and of the faint but growing fire in her chest that told her she was worth far more than the role of Daniel's discarded wife. The clock ticked on the wall, steady and indifferent, and Emily pressed the invitation flat on the table and stared at it, her mind swirling between fear, anger, and something unfamiliar, resolve. She didn't know yet what attending that wedding might mean. She didn't know how it would challenge her heart or force her to face everything she thought she had left behind. But one thing was clear. This story wasn't about Daniel anymore. It was about her. And with that thought, Emily folded the invitation carefully, placed it back in its envelope, and whispered to herself words she hadn't spoken in years. "This time, I won't break." Years before the gold-trimmed invitation arrived, Emily Carter had believed in love with the kind of faith that could move mountains. She met Daniel Miller at Ohio State University, where he carried himself with an energy that drew people in. He wasn't rich then, he wasn't powerful or connected. He was simply ambitious, a business major with sharp eyes and a charming smile. Emily, studying English literature, was drawn to his confidence and the way he spoke about the future, as if it already belonged to him. Their relationship began in small ways: coffee dates at a campus cafe, long walks under the Ohio autumn leaves, late-night study sessions where Daniel talked endlessly about building a company that would outshine every competitor. Emily listened, encouraged, and believed in him. She found his dreams intoxicating, and when he said, "Emily, I can see us building everything together," She believed it with all her heart. After graduation, life tested them. Daniel's business ideas were bold but shaky, and the early years were filled with failure. Investors pulled out, bills piled up, and stress crept into every corner of their small rented apartment. Emily took on 2 jobs, first as a substitute teacher, and then as a secretary at a law firm just to keep them afloat. She made dinners out of canned soup and stretched every dollar, while Daniel spent nights at his desk, scribbling business plans and making phone calls that rarely went anywhere. Friends often questioned her sacrifices. "Emily, don't you think you're giving up too much?" her best friend Claire asked one night over the phone. "You had dreams too. Remember graduate school? Your writing?" Emily smiled, though her voice trembled. "He just needs time. Once things take off, it'll be worth it. We'll both be free to dream then." And so she gave more, her time, her energy, her very identity, pouring it into Daniel's vision. She celebrated his small victories with the joy of a woman who believed her partner's success was her own. When Daniel finally landed his first real contract, Emily baked a cake even though they could barely afford the ingredients. She told him with tears in her eyes, "See, I knew you'd make it." But slowly the dynamic shifted. With every step Daniel climbed, the weight on Emily's shoulders grew heavier. His gratitude faded, replaced by expectation. When she came home exhausted, he would remark, "Emily, you don't understand the pressure I'm under. I need you to handle everything else so I can focus." She swallowed her frustrations, telling herself it was temporary, that love meant sacrifice. The years passed, and Daniel's star began to rise. Investors who once ignored him started taking meetings. Clients trusted his bold strategies. Money trickled in, then flowed. Their modest apartment was replaced by a sleek condo in downtown Columbus. Emily thought for a fleeting moment that the worst was behind them, but the condo felt less like a home and more like a showroom for Daniel's growing ego. She noticed the changes in him during parties he hosted for business associates. Daniel laughed louder, bragged more, and rarely acknowledged her sacrifices. Emily would stand quietly in the corner, holding a glass of wine, listening to him retell stories of his grind, as though he had carried it all alone. The man who once thanked her for believing in him now looked at her as though she was merely part of the furniture. Still, Emily clung to hope. One evening, after most guests had left, she approached him, her voice soft. "Daniel, do you ever think about us? About how far we've come together?" He didn't meet her eyes. "Emily, this is just the beginning. Don't get sentimental. We need to focus on what's next." That night, lying awake while Daniel snored beside her, Emily realized something she tried desperately to ignore. The man she had sacrificed everything for no longer saw her sacrifices at all. And though she didn't know it then, the seeds of betrayal had already begun to grow. By the time Daniel Miller's company secured its first multi-million-dollar deal, the distance between him and Emily had become a canyon. The once eager husband who leaned on her strength now carried himself like a man who no longer needed anyone. For Emily, the silence in their sleek Columbus condo was louder than any argument. At first, the cracks appeared as subtle dismissals. When Emily asked about his day, Daniel's responses grew clipped. "Stressful. You wouldn't understand," he muttered one evening, loosening his tie without looking at her. Another night, when she mentioned wanting to finish her degree, he brushed it off. "Emily, that's not practical right now. Focus on keeping things steady here while I take care of the bigger picture." His words stung, as if her ambitions were childlike fantasies rather than the dreams of a woman who had given everything to him. The dismissals soon hardened into ridicule. At a dinner with clients, Emily overheard Daniel chuckling about her modest background. She grew up in the kind of neighborhood where success meant owning 2 used cars that still ran. Cute, right? He smiled as the table laughed, unaware of the heat burning in Emily's chest. That night, when she confronted him, his face darkened. "Emily, don't embarrass me. Learn to take a joke." But the true betrayal came quietly, like a shadow slipping under a door. Emily noticed the late nights at the office, the unexplained business trips, the faint trace of perfume that wasn't hers on his shirts. She wanted to deny it, to cling to the hope that he was still the man she had once cheered for. But the truth whispered louder with each passing week. One evening, while clearing out the pocket of his suit jacket before sending it to the cleaners, she found a receipt from a luxury hotel in Chicago, 2 glasses of champagne listed under the same room number. Her chest tightened. When she confronted him, Daniel didn't deny it. He looked her squarely in the eyes and said with cold certainty, "Emily, we've grown apart. Sophie understands the world I'm in now. She belongs to it. You don't." The name seared itself into Emily's memory. Sophie, a woman who seemed to embody everything Daniel now valued: wealth, beauty, connections. Emily felt her knees weaken, her voice faltering. "After everything I gave up for you, how can you throw us away like this?" Daniel's reply was as sharp as glass. "You held me back, Emily. Don't you see? I wouldn't be where I am if I'd kept living small the way you do." The divorce was swift and merciless. Daniel's lawyers, polished and ruthless, ensured Emily left with nothing more than her personal belongings. There was no alimony, no property, no financial cushion to soften the fall. She packed her clothes, a few boxes of books, and left the condo that had never felt like home. Her heart heavy with grief, but burning with the faint spark of survival. The legal process stripped her bare, but what hurt most was the emotional weight. She remembered sitting in the courthouse parking lot after the final hearing, staring at the signed papers that declared the end of a decade-long chapter. The wind was bitter, carrying the smell of exhaust and cold asphalt. She whispered to herself, "He took everything, but he won't take me." Nights became the hardest. Emily lay awake, the silence pressing in, haunted by the laughter they once shared and the promises they once made. Friends called with pity in their voices, offering sympathy that felt more like reminders of her failure. Yet, deep down, Emily knew this was not the end. It was a brutal severing, yes, but also the beginning of something she couldn't yet name. Daniel, meanwhile, paraded Sophie openly, as though erasing Emily required flaunting his new love. Emily avoided the papers, the photos, the whispers, but inside she carried a truth he couldn't erase. She had once been his foundation, and though he had discarded her, she still stood. Broken, yes, but standing. The move from Daniel's pristine condo to a cramped apartment on the east side of Cleveland felt like crossing into another world. The building's hallway smelled faintly of old carpet and fried food, the paint chipped on the doors, and the radiator clanged loudly every night as if mocking her attempts at peace. Emily Carter carried her boxes up the narrow staircase alone, her arms shaking from exhaustion, her heart heavier than any load she lifted. Rent consumed nearly everything she earned. By day, she worked double shifts at a diner, her hair smelling of grease and coffee by the time she trudged home. By night, she enrolled in community college courses, desperate to salvage the dreams she had once set aside for Daniel. The textbooks spread across her kitchen table were second-hand, pages marked by strangers' notes, but they represented a fragile spark of hope. The routine was brutal. Her alarm rang at 5, dragging her out of restless sleep. She pulled on a faded uniform and tied her hair back, forcing a smile for the regulars at the diner. "Morning, Emily," old Mr. Jenkins greeted her each day, sliding into his usual booth. She poured his black coffee with steady hands, though inside she often felt like collapsing. When tips were good, she treated herself to a bus ride instead of walking home through the icy Cleveland winters. But more often she saved every penny, choosing blistered feet over an empty wallet. At night she sat by the single lamp in her apartment, highlighting passages in her books until her vision blurred. Her loneliness echoed in the silence. She would sometimes hold her phone, scrolling through old photos she hadn't yet deleted. Daniel smiling beside her at their college graduation, Daniel kissing her cheek at their first apartment. She would quickly set it down, ashamed of the ache that lingered despite everything he had done. The whispers of pity cut deepest. One afternoon at the grocery store, Emily overheard 2 former neighbors from her old life. "That's her, isn't it? Poor Emily. Can you imagine? After everything she gave him, he left her for someone younger, richer." Their words pierced, even though she pretended not to hear. At night, when the weight of it all pressed down, she cried quietly into her pillow. But alongside the tears, a stubborn voice rose within her. "You survived worse storms. You will not break here. Still, doubts crept in. While balancing plates at the diner one evening, she overheard a co-worker say, "She looks so tired. Maybe she should quit school and just stick to waitressing." Emily forced a smile, but inside the question haunted her. Was she chasing something impossible? Had Daniel been right, that she wasn't enough for the world he lived in? The pressure grew unbearable when she missed a rent payment. Her landlord, a gruff man with thinning hair, knocked on her door. "Emily, you're a week late. I need that check." Her face burned as she stammered an apology, promising to make it up after her next paycheck. He sighed but gave her a warning. "This isn't charity. Don't fall behind again." The humiliation was suffocating, but it lit a spark of determination. Emily stood in her tiny bathroom that night, staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror. Her eyes were swollen, her uniform stained, but she whispered to herself, "This won't be forever. I refuse to let it be." Her rock bottom wasn't just financial. It was emotional, the erosion of her belief in her own worth. Yet even in the darkest hours, she carried an ember of defiance. She had once built a life for someone else. Now, she promised, through clenched teeth and trembling hands, that she would learn how to build one for herself. The question remained, though, how could a woman so broken climb again? The diner smelled of frying bacon and fresh coffee, the kind of scent that clung to clothes and lingered long after the shift ended. Emily moved between tables with practiced ease, balancing plates and refilling cups, though her body ached from hours on her feet. It was a Thursday morning, bitterly cold outside, the kind of day when regulars bundled in thick coats and ordered extra coffee just to stay warm. She was delivering a plate of pancakes to table 6 when a man's voice stopped her. "Excuse me, miss, could I get another cup of coffee?" His tone was polite, deep, steady. Emily turned and found herself looking at someone she didn't recognize, a man in his early 40s, sharp suit beneath his overcoat, yet with eyes that carried a quiet weariness. "Of course," she said, managing a smile. She took his cup, noticing his hands, strong but with a softness that spoke of care rather than arrogance. When she returned, he studied her name tag. "Emily." "Thank you." There was nothing unusual at first, just another customer, though he carried himself differently than the businessmen she usually served. He wasn't loud, didn't brag into a phone or demand special treatment. Instead, he sat quietly with a folder of papers, occasionally glancing out the window at the snow falling over the street. Over the next hour, Emily passed his table several times. Each time he acknowledged her with a nod or a soft, "Thank you," small gestures that felt strangely comforting. When he asked for the check, he added, "You look like you've had a long day, though it's barely started." Emily laughed lightly, though the truth slipped into her voice. "Every day feels long when you're juggling 2 jobs and night classes." She instantly regretted the honesty, not wanting pity, but instead of the condescending smile she expected, his expression softened with respect. "That's not something to be ashamed of. That's grit." She blinked, caught off guard. Caught. Most people who heard about her struggles either pitied her or dismissed her, but his words carried no judgment. He paid the bill, leaving a tip larger than the meal itself, and paused before leaving. "My name's Michael Harrison. It was good to meet you, Emily." The name lingered in her mind after he walked out into the snow. She tried to shake it off, returning to her shift, but there was something about the way he had looked at her, not with pity, not with superiority, but with genuine acknowledgement that stayed with her. The next week, he returned. This time he ordered an omelette and brought a worn leather notebook instead of a folder. "Do you always work this hard?" he asked casually as she refilled his cup. Emily chuckled. "Hard work's the only option when you're starting over." Her words hung in the air, more revealing than she intended. Michael tilted his head. "Starting over can be the best thing that ever happens to someone. It forces you to discover who you really are." Emily didn't reply immediately. She felt the truth of his words, but also the sting of her own doubts. Could starting over really lead to anything more than exhaustion? Over the following weeks, Michael became a regular. He never pried, but their conversations grew longer, stretching beyond polite exchanges into meaningful discussions. He asked about her classes, encouraged her when she spoke of her dreams to finish her degree, and listened with genuine interest. One evening after her shift ended, Emily found him waiting outside. The night was sharp with winter air, and her breath formed clouds as she pulled her coat tight. "Emily," he said, "I don't want to overstep, but you're stronger than you realize. Don't let anyone make you forget that." His words pierced through the layers of fatigue and self-doubt she carried. For the first time in years, someone saw more than a tired waitress or a discarded ex-wife. They saw potential. She walked home that night with her heart strangely lighter, the snow crunching under her boots, a thought repeating in her mind. Maybe my story isn't finished after all. Spring brought a cautious warmth to Cleveland, melting the last of the dirty snowbanks along the streets. For Emily, the season mirrored her own fragile thaw. Weeks had passed since her first encounters with Michael Harrison, and though she still struggled with exhaustion, her steps felt steadier, her shoulders a little lighter. One evening at the diner, during a lull between the dinner and late-night crowds, Michael sat at his usual booth. He closed his leather notebook and looked directly at her. "Emily, may I ask you something personal?" She hesitated but nodded. "Why did you stop pursuing your education? You're clearly smart, capable, driven. What held you back?" Her throat tightened. She set the coffee pot on the counter and leaned against it, unsure how much to reveal. "I gave up graduate school for my ex-husband. He said we couldn't both chase dreams at the same time. So I worked while he built his business. When the marriage ended, so did everything I thought I had." Michael's gaze was steady, not pitying, but thoughtful. "And what about now? What do you want for yourself?" The question struck her harder than she expected. For years she hadn't dared to answer honestly. Her voice was quiet, almost fragile. "I want to finish what I started. I want to prove that I can stand on my own. But tuition costs more than I can manage right now." Michael tapped the notebook in front of him, his expression softening. "Sometimes the right opportunity comes when you least expect it. If I could help open that door, would you walk through it?" Her eyes widened. "Help me how?" He smiled gently. "Consider it a scholarship, not charity. An investment in someone who deserves a second chance." Emily's chest tightened with conflicting emotions. Gratitude, suspicion, fear of owing anyone anything again. She shook her head quickly. "I can't accept money from you. That wouldn't be right." "I'm not asking you to accept a handout," he said firmly. "I'm offering a chance. You've already proven your resilience. I want to see what you can do when you're not weighed down by survival." She studied him for a long moment, torn between pride and possibility. Finally, she whispered, "If I say yes, I won't let you down." That night, lying in her apartment, she stared at the ceiling with restless energy. For the first time in years, the future seemed less like a shadow and more like a door waiting to be opened. Weeks later, paperwork was filed, applications submitted, and Emily was accepted into a business program at Case Western Reserve University. The first day she walked onto campus, textbooks tucked under her arm, she felt a nervous thrill. Students half her age hurried around her, earbuds in, laughing in groups, but she refused to shrink. She belonged here. Balancing classes with diner shifts wasn't easy, but Emily discovered a well of determination she hadn't tapped in years. She stayed late in the library, scribbling notes until her hand cramped. She debated fiercely in class discussions, her voice steady, her thoughts sharp. Professors began to notice her diligence and classmates admired her focus. Michael checked in occasionally, not as a benefactor but as a mentor. "How's it going?" he asked one afternoon when they met for coffee. She grinned, exhaustion bright in her eyes. "Harder than I thought, but I've never felt so alive." His answering smile was proud. "That's because you're finally building something for yourself." Emily's life was still a balancing act, work, study, bills, but something inside her had shifted. Each day wasn't just survival anymore, it was progress. The echo of Daniel's dismissive words grew fainter, replaced by the steady rhythm of her own determination. And though Emily couldn't see it yet, Her second chance was only the beginning of a transformation greater than she ever imagined. Graduation day arrived beneath a cloudless sky, the campus buzzing with the hum of families, cameras flashing, and the scent of fresh-cut grass. Emily stood in her cap and gown, her heart swelling with something she hadn't felt in years, pride that was entirely her own. When her name was called, she walked across the stage with her head high, clutching the diploma that symbolized every late night, every sacrifice, every tear shed in silence. Afterward, Michael waited at the edge of the crowd, his smile warm and genuine. "You did it," he said, handing her a bouquet of white lilies. Emily laughed softly, blinking back tears. "I never thought I'd see this day." "That's the thing about you, Emily," Michael replied. "You underestimate just how much strength you carry." Their bond, once tentative, had deepened over the years. At first, he was a mentor who opened a door when she thought all were closed. But slowly their conversations stretched beyond school and work, touching on fears, joys, and dreams. Trust grew where suspicion once lived, and affection blossomed where loneliness had taken root. When Michael invited her to join his investment firm in New York, Emily hesitated. "What if I'm not ready? What if I fail?" He looked at her with quiet conviction. "You've already proven you can do more with less than most people could ever dream. Imagine what you'll achieve with the right tools and support. You belong there, Emily." And so she took the leap. The first weeks were overwhelming, the gleaming skyscrapers, the endless pace of Manhattan, the polished confidence of her colleagues. But Emily adapted. She poured herself into the work, her attention to detail and relentless drive earning respect quickly. Soon she was handling negotiations, managing clients, and proving herself indispensable. The office buzzed with energy, but Emily brought something different to the table. She wasn't just another executive chasing numbers. She understood struggle, resilience, and human connection. That authenticity drew people in, and her reputation grew. At the same time, her relationship with Michael evolved. He was no longer just her mentor, he became her partner in every sense. Evenings once filled with exhaustion and loneliness were now spent sharing wine and stories in his townhouse, laughter echoing against the walls. They were two people who had both known loss, he the ache of widowhood, she the scars of betrayal, and together they discovered healing. When Emily learned she was pregnant, she sat stunned in their kitchen, staring at the test in her trembling hand. Michael found her there, tears streaming down her face. "Emily?" he asked gently, his brow furrowing. She held out the test, her voice breaking. "Twins, Michael, twins." For a moment silence hung between them. Then his face lit up with a joy so pure it stole her breath. He wrapped her in his arms and whispered, "This is the beginning of everything we've been waiting for." 9 months later, Emily cradled her newborns in the quiet of their home, overwhelmed by the miracle of 2 tiny lives. The townhouse, once echoing with emptiness, now filled with the soft cries of babies and the warmth of family. At night, rocking her children by the window, Emily often reflected on her journey. The woman who had once begged for scraps of affection now stood in a place of love and abundance. She had not only rebuilt her life, she had created a new one, brick by brick, choice by choice. Her past still lingered in memories, but it no longer defined her. What defined her now was resilience, love, and a future that belonged entirely to her. The sound of mail sliding through the brass slot echoed faintly in the Manhattan townhouse. Emily bent to pick up the small stack from the floor, sorting bills and advertisements as her twins played nearby, their laughter filling the room with warmth. But when her eyes fell on a thick ivory envelope sealed with golden wax, her stomach tightened. The handwriting across the front was painfully familiar. Her hands trembled as she opened it, revealing an ornate card printed with elegant calligraphy. "Daniel Miller and Sophie Anderson request the honor of your presence at their wedding celebration." The words blurred for a moment as her vision swam. She sank into the sofa, the laughter of her children fading behind the pounding in her ears. After all these years, after all the battles she had fought to rebuild herself, here was Daniel again, inviting her not out of kindness, but out of something darker. She knew him too well, This was a performance, and she had been cast in the role of the defeated ex-wife. When Michael came into the room carrying a tray with 2 cups of coffee, he noticed her pale expression. "Emily, what's wrong?" She held out the invitation with unsteady fingers. "It's from Daniel. He's getting married." Michael's eyes scanned the card, his jaw tightening. "And he wants you there." She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know him. He wants to humiliate me. He thinks I'll show up alone, still broken." Michael set the tray down and took her hand firmly in his. "Emily, you don't owe him anything. If you want to ignore this, we will." She shook her head, torn between fear and defiance. "If I ignore it, he wins. He'll believe I'm still hiding in the shadows, ashamed. But if I go out, I can prove, not to him but to myself, that I'm not that woman anymore." Michael studied her face, his gaze steady. "Then we'll go together. You won't face him alone. Not ever again." Her chest tightened with emotion. There was a time when she would have cowered at the thought of standing before Daniel again, but now, with Michael beside her and her children's laughter filling her home, she felt a spark of courage. Still, doubts lingered. That night, after the twins were asleep, Emily sat by the window staring out at the glowing city skyline. Memories of Daniel's sharp words, of the nights she cried herself to sleep, rose unbidden. The thought of walking into a room filled with his friends, his colleagues, his new bride, it felt like walking into a storm. Michael came up behind her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You're thinking about the past again," she nodded. "I can't help it. What if I freeze? What if seeing him undoes me?" "You've already faced worse," Michael said softly. "You've rebuilt everything he tried to destroy. You're stronger now, Emily, and this wedding, it doesn't define you. You define you." Her throat tightened. She turned to look at him, his steady presence grounding her. "I'm scared, Michael." "Good," he replied with a faint smile. "That means it matters. But you don't have to be fearless. You just have to be you, and that's enough." Emily leaned into his embrace, the city lights glowing like distant stars beyond the glass. For the first time since opening the envelope, she allowed herself to breathe deeply. Daniel's invitation was meant to wound, to drag her back into the shadows of the woman she once was. But Emily Carter was no longer that woman. She was a mother, a partner, a professional, and above all a survivor. And though the path ahead would be difficult, she knew with certainty she would walk into that wedding not as Daniel's discarded ex-wife, but as her own woman, unbroken, unbowed, and stronger than ever. The weeks leading up to the wedding stretched like an unspoken challenge. Each day, Emily woke with the reminder of what awaited her, a confrontation with the man who had once broken her spirit. But instead of crumbling under the weight, she channeled the tension into preparation. One Saturday morning, Michael found her sitting at the dining table surrounded by bridal magazines and fabric swatches. She wasn't flipping through them idly. She was studying, calculating. "I want to walk into that room not just looking presentable," she said, her voice steady, "but radiant. He expects me to look small, forgotten. I won't give him that satisfaction." Michael leaned against the doorframe, watching her with a mixture of admiration and tenderness. "Emily, you don't need a dress to prove your strength. You already shine brighter than he ever imagined." She smiled faintly. "Maybe so, but sometimes armor looks like silk." Together they visited boutiques, the hum of Manhattan life outside blending with the rustle of fabrics inside. Emily tried on gowns, some too extravagant, others too plain. When she finally stepped out in a simple yet elegant navy dress that draped gracefully against her frame, Michael's eyes softened. "That's the one," he said quietly. "You look like yourself, only stronger." In the mirror, Emily hardly recognized the woman staring back. Gone was the timid wife who had once stood quietly in Daniel's shadow. This woman's posture was upright, her gaze unflinching. She allowed herself a small smile. But the preparations weren't only about appearances. Memories clawed their way back, testing her resolve. At night, as she tucked her twins into bed, she would sometimes freeze at the thought of Daniel's mocking smirk, the way he used to diminish her with a single phrase. The ghost of his voice whispered, You're nothing without me. One evening, while folding laundry, she confided in Michael. Every time I think I've silenced him, his words come back. What if, when I see him again, it all unravels? Michael set the clothes aside and took her hands firmly. Emily, his words only have power if you believe them, and you don't anymore. You've built a life he can't touch. You've given our children love and stability. You've proven to yourself and to everyone that you're so much more than he ever saw. Her eyes welled, not from weakness, but from the truth of it. She nodded, letting the reassurance sink into the cracks of her lingering fear. Meanwhile, whispers about Daniel and Sophie filtered through mutual acquaintances. Sophie, with her wealth and flawless image, had been flaunting the wedding as a social event of the season. She loves attention, one old college friend told Emily during a chance encounter at a cafe. But she also knows Daniel's past. Don't think she hasn't heard about you. Emily absorbed the information quietly. It didn't surprise her. Sophie thrived on competition, and Emily's very presence at the wedding would spark tension. But instead of intimidation, the thought stirred something else: resolve. On the night before the trip to New York, Emily stood by the window of her children's nursery, watching the city lights twinkle. Her twins slept peacefully, their small breaths a reminder of everything she had gained since losing Daniel. She whispered softly, "I'm not walking into his world for revenge. I'm walking in because I refuse to hide anymore." The ghosts of her past still lingered, but for the first time Emily felt she could face them, not with bitterness but with dignity. And that dignity, she knew, would be the sharpest answer to the cruelty of her past. The towering cathedral in Midtown Manhattan loomed against the Saturday sky, its stone spires cutting sharply into the clouds. Guests in tailored suits and glittering gowns flowed toward its grand doors, their chatter echoing across the marble steps. Inside the sleek black car, Emily's fingers tightened around Michael's hand. Her navy dress shimmered subtly in the sunlight, but her nerves pressed hard against her composure. Michael squeezed her hand gently. "Breathe. You're not here to prove anything to him. You're here because you chose to be." She drew in a slow breath, watching her reflection in the tinted window. The woman looking back seemed composed, but beneath the calm exterior her heart hammered. "I keep wondering if this is a mistake," she admitted softly. "It's not," Michael replied, his tone steady. "Daniel expects a ghost of who you were. What he'll see instead is the woman you've become. That alone will be enough." The car door opened, and the hum of conversations rushed in. Heads turned as Emily and Michael stepped out together. For a moment the crowd seemed to pause, recognition flashing in the eyes of those who had once whispered about Emily's downfall. Now those same whispers carried a different tone: surprise, curiosity, even admiration. Emily lifted her chin and walked forward, each step deliberate. The grand entrance doors opened, revealing the golden glow of chandeliers and the echo of string instruments warming up. Inside, guests milled about, glasses of champagne already in hand, their voices rising in polite laughter. At the far end of the aisle, Daniel stood with Sophie, greeting arrivals. He looked polished, his tailored tuxedo perfectly cut, his smile wide. But when his eyes found Emily, something flickered behind his confident mask. A brief tightening of his jaw, a spark of disbelief. Emily caught it, and though her pulse quickened, she forced her lips into a calm smile. Sophie, radiant in a designer gown even before the ceremony began, leaned toward Daniel, her voice low but edged with disdain. "That's her?" "The ex?" Daniel's smirk returned, though his eyes didn't leave Emily. "Yes?" And she finally showed up. Guests nearby began to murmur, their gazes darting between the trio. Emily heard fragments. "She looks incredible. Didn't she used to struggle after the divorce? Who's the man with her?" Michael slipped an arm lightly around her waist, not possessive but supportive, his presence a silent shield. "Ignore the noise," he whispered. Emily nodded, focusing on steadying her breath. She reminded herself that this wasn't about appearances or whispers. This was about facing the shadows of her past without flinching. As they moved deeper into the cathedral, Emily felt the weight of dozens of eyes following her. The polished marble floor reflected the chandeliers above, casting light that seemed to spotlight her every step. She kept her gaze forward, resisting the urge to shrink. When they reached their seats near the front, Emily lowered herself gracefully, her dress settling neatly around her. Michael leaned in, murmuring, "You walked in like you owned the room." She allowed herself the faintest smile. "I felt like my legs would give out." "But they didn't," he replied. "That's the difference." From across the room, Daniel continued to glance at her, his carefully crafted smile faltering each time he caught her composure. Sophie's eyes narrowed, her expression betraying annoyance at the attention drifting away from her. Emily folded her hands in her lap, her heart still racing but her resolve firm. For the first time in years, she realized she wasn't just surviving. She was holding her ground in the very place where Daniel had expected her to collapse. And as the music swelled, signaling the ceremony's approach, Emily sat straighter, prepared to endure what came next. She hadn't come to be silent background, she had come to stand tall. The ceremony unfolded with rehearsed perfection, golden light streaming through stained glass, violins weaving elegant notes, Sophie gliding down the aisle as though the cathedral itself had been built to frame her beauty. Emily sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, every muscle taut. She felt Daniel's eyes on her more often than not, even as he spoke his vows. After the applause, the celebration shifted to the grand ballroom of an upscale Manhattan hotel. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above tables draped in ivory cloth, waiters weaving through with trays of champagne. Emily held her glass carefully, her posture calm though her chest thudded with nerves. She had prepared herself for whispers, but not for the inevitable moment Daniel would come to her. And come he did. She sensed him before he spoke, his cologne, once familiar, now suffocating, reaching her first. "Emily," he said smoothly, his voice carrying the same blend of charm and arrogance that once held her captive. "I almost didn't believe you'd show." Emily turned slowly, her gaze meeting his without flinching. "I wasn't going to. But then I realized hiding would give you what you wanted." His smile tightened. "Still fiery, I see, though I have to admit I didn't expect—" His eyes flicked over her dress, her poise, the quiet strength in her presence. "This version of you." Michael, standing beside her, extended a hand with measured calm. "Michael Harrison." His tone was steady, firm. Daniel hesitated, then shook it. The recognition flickered in his eyes. Michael's name was not unknown in business circles. "So this is the man," Daniel said, turning back to Emily with a smirk. "I suppose congratulations are in order. You've done better than I thought you would." Emily's lips curved faintly, not in mockery but in self-possession. "I didn't do better than you thought. I did better than you ever wanted me to." The air thickened, the surrounding chatter dimming as guests tuned subtly into the exchange. Daniel chuckled, though the edge in his voice betrayed unease. "You always had a sharp tongue. But let's be honest. Without me, where would you have started? I gave you a life you never would have had otherwise." Michael's voice cut in, low but clear. "You're mistaken. What Emily built, she built herself. You may have been part of her past, but her strength, that was always hers." Daniel's jaw flexed, a flash of irritation breaking through his polished facade. "Interesting perspective," he muttered, his eyes darting between them. Emily held his gaze. "Daniel, the truth is simple. I don't owe you anger or bitterness or even gratitude. You're just part of the story that made me realize who I am. That's all." For the first time, Daniel faltered. His smirk slipped, his voice catching before he replied, "You've changed." "Yes," Emily answered softly. "And it's the best thing that ever happened to me." The surrounding murmurs grew louder, fragments of admiration reaching her ears. "She carries herself so well. He doesn't know how to handle her now." Daniel heard them too. His shoulders stiffened, his confidence thinning under the weight of eyes no longer admiring him alone. Sophie approached then, her irritation poorly veiled. "Daniel, darling, we should be greeting the guests. Don't waste too much time on old acquaintances." Emily inclined her head politely. "Congratulations, Sophie. You look lovely." Sophie forced a tight smile before tugging Daniel away, but not before Emily caught the flicker of frustration in her eyes. As the couple disappeared into the crowd, Michael leaned close to Emily. "You didn't just hold your ground, you turned the tables." Emily exhaled slowly, her heartbeat beginning to steady. "For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm finally free." But the night wasn't over. The real moment of revelation, the one Daniel could never have anticipated, was still waiting. The ballroom swelled with chatter, crystal glasses clinking as waiters weaved through the crowd. Music drifted from the string quartet, elegant and controlled, but beneath the refined surface tension crackled. Emily could feel it, the shift in the air after her exchange with Daniel. People weren't whispering about Sophie's dress or the opulence of the venue anymore. They were whispering about her. Michael noticed it too. "You handled him better than I could have imagined," he murmured, his hand steady at the small of her back. Emily gave a faint smile, though her pulse still thrummed. It wasn't about handling him. It was about finally telling the truth out loud. Before she could say more, the side doors of the ballroom opened. A familiar voice cut through the din, soft but clear. "Mrs. Harrison, I thought you'd like to know the children are here." Emily turned, her heart warming instantly. The twins, dressed neatly in matching outfits, walked hand in hand with their nanny. At 3 years old, they carried themselves with the curious boldness of children, unaware of the spectacle around them. Their bright eyes scanned the room, and when they spotted Emily, they broke into delighted laughter. "Mommy!" they shouted in unison, rushing forward. Gasps rippled through the guests as Emily bent down, sweeping them into her arms. The sight of her, poised, graceful, with 2 radiant children clinging to her, sent a shockwave through the crowd. Daniel's glass froze halfway to his lips. His smile faltered, confusion darkening into disbelief. Sophie beside him stiffened, her manicured hand gripping his arm a little too tightly. Emily rose, balancing one twin on her hip as the other clung to her hand. She felt the weight of every eye in the room, but instead of shrinking, she straightened her shoulders. The twins giggled, tugging at her earrings, their innocence cutting through the tension like sunlight breaking clouds. Guests began whispering again, but this time the tone was different. "She has children. With him." "That's Michael Harrison's family." Daniel finally set his glass down, striding across the room with a forced smile. "Emily," he said tightly, "you didn't mention you had children." Emily met his gaze evenly. "Not everything about my life revolves around you anymore." One of the twins looked up at Michael as he joined them, reaching a small hand toward him. "Daddy, pick me up." Michael obliged with ease, lifting the child into his arms. The word, "Daddy," hung in the air like a thunderclap. Conversations faltered, and the string quartet seemed almost to stumble over their notes. Daniel's mask cracked. His voice dropped, sharp beneath the forced charm. "So, this is your family now?" Emily's reply was calm, deliberate. "Yes, this is my family. A family built on respect, love, and trust. Things you never valued." Sophie's expression hardened, jealousy flaring in her eyes. She leaned toward Daniel, hissing under her breath. "Everyone's staring, do something." But Daniel couldn't seem to move. The whispers grew louder, the tide of admiration shifting away from him toward the woman he once dismissed. Emily smoothed her daughter's hair and kissed the top of her son's head, her smile tender and genuine. In that moment, she wasn't performing, wasn't proving anything. She was simply living her truth, and the truth was undeniable. She had not only survived Daniel's betrayal, she had thrived beyond it. Daniel stood frozen, his jaw clenched, his confidence unraveling before the eyes of the very crowd he had wanted to impress. For once he had no clever remark, no polished deflection. Emily turned back to Michael, their children nestled between them. Her voice was soft but resolute. "I thought this day would break me. Instead, it's the day I realize I'm whole." The ballroom no longer hummed with polite conversation. It buzzed, restless and sharp, as though the air itself had shifted sides. Guests leaned toward each other, voices dropping into hurried whispers, while their eyes flicked toward Daniel. He had wanted this night to cement his place among New York's elite, but instead, it was slipping out of his control. Emily stood steady, one child's hand clasped in hers while Michael held the other. She didn't need to gloat or boast. The quiet strength in her presence was enough. That truth seemed to sting Daniel more than anything. One of his business associates, a gray-haired man with a watch worth more than most people's homes, approached with a polite smile. "Mr. Harrison, I didn't realize your ex-wife had remarried." To Michael Harrison, of all people. His words were laced with admiration, but the admiration wasn't for Daniel. Daniel forced a laugh. "Yes, well, Emily's always had a knack for landing on her feet." The man's gaze lingered on Emily. "She seems to have landed beautifully." With that, he excused himself, leaving Daniel's jaw tight and his glass nearly cracking under the pressure of his grip. Sophie stepped closer, her tone sharp as she whispered, "They're making a spectacle out of us. Do you see the way people are looking at her?" "You're letting her win," Daniel snapped under his breath. "No one is winning anything. This is our wedding." But the cracks in his composure widened. A group of women nearby whispered audibly enough for Emily to catch. She looked so confident. "Not at all the way Daniel used to describe her." Another replied, "It almost makes you wonder if he was the problem all along." Michael leaned toward Emily, his voice calm and steady. "You don't have to say a word. They're seeing the truth for themselves." Emily nodded slightly. Her silence was louder than any speech she could have given. Unable to bear it, Daniel strode back toward her, his smile stretched thin. "Emily, you must be enjoying this," he said through clenched teeth. She tilted her head, her tone composed. "I didn't come here to enjoy anything, Daniel. I came here to wish you well and to show myself that I could stand here without fear. That's all." Her calmness unsettled him more than hostility ever could. His voice sharpened. "Don't pretend this isn't exactly what you wanted. To parade yourself in front of everyone, to—" Michael cut in smoothly, his voice steady, but carrying enough weight to silence the nearby murmurs. What Emily wanted was dignity, something you never gave her. Tonight she doesn't have to ask for it. It's clear to everyone she already has it. Daniel's face flushed, the composure draining from him in front of the very crowd he wanted to impress. Sophie tugged at his arm again, her patience thin. "Stop drawing attention. People are staring because you're losing control." But it was too late. The room's focus had shifted irrevocably. Emily's presence, her grace, her quiet resilience, all of it had exposed Daniel's arrogance for what it was. No speech, no toast, no perfectly planned detail of the wedding could undo it. Emily bent down to kiss the top of her daughter's head, her movements gentle, unaffected by the storm swirling around her, and in that simple act she made Daniel's desperate showmanship seem hollow. For once Daniel had no words. His silence, heavy and bitter, was the clearest admission of defeat. The ballroom's grandeur no longer held Emily's attention. The chandeliers sparkled, the music played, the guests continued to chatter, but for her, the evening had reached its conclusion. She had faced Daniel, endured the weight of his gaze, and walked through the fire of whispers. And she had not only survived, she had emerged untouched, perhaps even brighter than before. Michael leaned toward her, his voice low but steady. "We don't need to stay any longer. You've already said everything without saying a word." Emily looked down at her twins, who were growing restless, tugging at the hem of her dress. Their innocence reminded her of what truly mattered. She smiled softly. "You're right. Let's go home." As they made their way toward the exit, the murmurs followed. Heads turned, eyes lingered, but not with pity. There was admiration in those glances, respect in the silence that seemed to trail behind them. Emily kept her chin high, her step steady, every movement radiating the dignity she had fought so hard to reclaim. Daniel watched from across the room, his drink untouched, Sophie whispering angrily at his side. His jaw tightened as he realized Emily was leaving on her own terms, unshaken. She hadn't been humiliated, she hadn't cowered. She had walked into his carefully crafted kingdom and left it without a scratch. Outside, the night air was cool against her skin. The noise of the ballroom faded. replaced by the hum of city traffic and the distant sound of horns. Emily exhaled deeply, her body loosening as though she had been holding her breath for years. Michael slipped his hand into hers. "How do you feel?" She thought for a long moment before answering. "Free. Not because I proved anything to him, but because I don't need to anymore. His opinion of me has no power, not anymore." They walked together down the quiet street, the twins in tow, their laughter rising above the night. For Emily, it wasn't just an escape from the wedding, it was the final step out of Daniel's shadow. In the days that followed, she reflected often on what closure truly meant. It wasn't revenge, nor was it triumph over another. Closure was choosing peace when bitterness begged for attention. It was realizing the past had shaped her, but no longer defined her. At breakfast one morning, Michael handed her a steaming mug of coffee. "You know," he said with a teasing smile, "most people would have made a scene. You managed to silence him without even raising your voice." Emily chuckled. "There was a time when I would have shouted, cried, begged him to see me, but what's the point? Silence was louder." Her twins ran through the living room, their giggles filling the home with warmth. Emily watched them with a tenderness that made her chest ache. "This is what matters," she whispered. "Not proving him wrong, but building this life right." She began writing again in the evenings, something she had abandoned long ago, her journal filled with thoughts about resilience, growth, and second chances. She wrote not to dwell on the past, but to preserve the lessons she had earned through pain and perseverance. And as she wrote, she realized she no longer carried the heaviness of Daniel's betrayal. What remained instead was gratitude for the strength she discovered, for the love she found, for the family she had built. Closure, she finally understood, wasn't something Daniel could give her. It was something she had created herself. The morning light streamed through the tall windows of the Harrison townhouse, painting the hardwood floors in soft gold. Emily sat at the kitchen table, sipping her coffee, while her twins played nearby with blocks that clattered joyfully against the floor. The scent of fresh toast filled the air, and Michael hummed faintly as he read the newspaper across from her. It was an ordinary morning, but for Emily it carried the weight of something extraordinary: peace. In the weeks since Daniel's wedding, she had noticed how differently she carried herself. The fear of running into his shadow, the ache of proving her worth, the bitterness that had once haunted her. It was gone. She no longer woke with a knot in her chest. She no longer replayed old conversations, wondering what she might have said differently. Instead, she woke to the laughter of her children and the steady presence of a man who loved her without conditions. One afternoon, while walking through Central Park with Michael and the twins, Emily paused by the pond, watching the ripples spread across the water. "It's strange," she murmured, "how something that once felt like the end of my world now feels so small." Michael squeezed her hand gently. "That's because you've built a bigger world, one that belongs entirely to you." She looked at him, her heart swelling. "I used to think closure meant seeing him regret losing me, but now I see it was never about him. It was about me choosing to live free of him." Michael smiled, his eyes warm. "That's the kind of strength no one can take away." The twins ran ahead, their laughter echoing through the park. Emily watched them, realizing they were her truest symbols of renewal. They represented not what she had lost, but what she had gained. Her life was no longer defined by betrayal. It was defined by resilience, love, and the family she had created with her own courage. News of Daniel and Sophie's rocky start trickled through mutual acquaintances, but Emily no longer cared. The whispers about their arguments, their jealousy, their fragile facade, it all felt distant, irrelevant. She wished them no harm, but she also wasted no thought on them. Their story was theirs, and hers had moved on. At night, Emily sometimes wrote in her journal, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She wrote about sacrifice, about betrayal, about hitting rock bottom and clawing her way back to the surface. She wrote about the chance encounter with Michael that blossomed into love, and about the quiet victories that built the foundation for her new life. Writing didn't reopen old wounds, it reminded her of the scars she carried proudly, proof that she had survived. One evening, after tucking the twins into bed, Emily sat with Michael by the fireplace. The flames flickered gently, casting warmth across their faces. She leaned into him and whispered, "Do you realize how far I've come? How far we've come?" He kissed her forehead. "Every step of the way, Emily, and the best part is, we're just getting started." Her eyes closed, her heart full. For the first time in her life, the future didn't scare her. It called to her, open and bright. Emily Carter had once been the woman people pitied, the woman discarded and mocked. Now she was a woman who had reclaimed her life, her dignity, and her joy. She had walked through betrayal and loss and emerged not weaker, but stronger than she had ever been. And just like her story, yours too can turn from pain to triumph. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful and emotional stories like this one, where lives transform in ways no one could imagine. And if you're ready for the next journey, click the video suggested on your screen. You won't want to miss what comes next.